Hello YouTube folks, welcome to my channel. My name is Steph and today I am going through an ultimate LGBTQIA plus book recommendation list. So what we're not going to do today is look at my lights that are down. This corner, the lights will not stay up and I don't know what to do about it, so we're just not gonna look at it. I even tried to angle the camera, but there was no way. There's no way. So just don't look at it. Look at these that are staying up as they should. So obviously this isn't going to be a list of every single queer book that I know of or have ever read in my life. This is just what I could come up with that I've read in the past 2 or 3 years that I really loved or had a lot to glean from. And I just wanna, celebrate Pride Month by going through all of my most beloved queer books. So I have these categorized because this is going to be a long list. I'm going to try really hard to not yap. I organized the books by genre. So we're going to start with romance, and then we're going to do fantasy, which of course is the biggest category because that's my favorite genre. And then we're going to do sci-fi, and then nonfiction. I also have some nonfiction recommendations. And my undergrad was in gender and sexuality studies, so I'm not gonna recommend the textbooks that I read, but I do have a couple regular memoir, nonfiction, social studies style books to recommend. Let's get started. This video is going to be a million years long. So the first book I'm going to recommend is Red, White, and Royal Blue by Casey McQuiston. I have the cute cover from the Prime show. This was really popular 5 or 6 years ago. It's essentially a gay man relationship romance book about the son of the president and the Prince of England and how they cause a lot of mischief. Honestly, this doesn't read like a romance. I read this like a political comedy satire piece that had also this really cute gay romance in it. You can decide whether or not you read for the funny or read for the romance, but this does feature 2 gay men maybe falling in love. The next book in the romance section is 7 Husbands of Evelyn Hugo by Taylor Jenkins Reid. This is a gay love story between 2 women. It's a lesbian love story. However, that's a little bit of a spoiler. So I'm really sorry if you haven't read this book, but also everyone's read this book. It was one of the first books trending on TikTok, ever in the existence of TikTok. So I'm sure you've read it, but this is 1950s style woman pulling herself up from her bootstraps, rising up to fame, and kind of all of the men that she used or did fall in love with along the way to become the superstar that she ends up becoming. 7 Husbands. So the romance section went by fast. I only had 2 books in that section because I honestly don't read a ton of romance books. I like books with romance in them, so what you gonna do? But my next book recommendation, the first in the fantasy section, is Song of Achilles by Madeline Miller. This is a pretty true to the tale retelling of Achilles' life from the perspective of his lover. I'm not going to say it right. Please don't hate on me. Patroclus. I'm so bad with names. Every video, I mess up at least one name. But it's told as though the gods are real, so it is fantasy-y, I would consider it. And it's just the experience of growing up, being trained, Achilles' destiny, and his romance with Patroclus, and kind of what goes down in the Trojan War. Really interesting stuff. This is a gay man romance book. The next book is What Moves the Dead by T. Kingfisher. This is a duology. I don't remember what the second book is called. It's What Feasts in the Night or something like that. But this does not have a romance in it. The main character is non-binary, and it's actually woven into the story really interestingly because it's a fake world. So in this world, there's no such thing as non-binary or third gender, whatever you want to call it, gender fluid. But there is a section of the military that worked its way around the rule that women couldn't fight in battles by having women join that section of the military but go genderless. Like, they have another pronoun and they strip themselves of their femininity and female status in society, and they become honored as people who serve. So they're not like these disgusting, hated third gender people. They just worked around the rule that women couldn't fight by no longer being women, but they're also not men. And the main character comes from that military faction and talks a lot about how some of the people after fighting in the war went back to being women's, and like this person, they continued the legacy by staying as the third gender person. So it's really interesting. This story is like a found family, typical T. Kingfisher, with some dark horror in it. It's pretty gothic. There's like a mansion, and there's like bunnies that get infected and go crazy, and it's pretty spooky, but like in that lighthearted, fun way that T. Kingfisher does so well. So What Moves the Dead, that is, I think in the terminology of this planet, I would consider that main character non-binary. Next book on this list is The Starless Sea by Erin Morgenstern. The main character is a gay man, and there is a gay romance throughout the story. How do I even explain this book? How? Please tell me how. This book is a book about books. It's so hard to describe. I'm just gonna give like a quick what happens in the beginning and then leave it the rest to you. But essentially, this guy who's in college comes across the book in his college library, and there is a chapter in it that is so specifically him. Like, somebody wrote down, scripted a moment from his life, and it was so unique to his life that he knew it was him. And so he goes on an investigation to figure it out, and he finds this like society of hidden libraries that maintain stories that are like mythical and divine and also human, and also humans kind of have some powers, and there's an owl king, and that's all I can say. I did my best. The next book is The Spirit Bears Its Teeth by Andrew Joseph White. I will be recommending both of Andrew Joseph White's books in this video. I did a whole video on how incredible both of his books are. So this author is queer. He is a trans man, and he is also autistic, so he writes from his perspective. So in Spirit Bears Its Teeth, the main character is assigned female at birth, but it's like in Regency era or something. Like it's kind of a couple hundred years in the past, you know? So there's really no such thing as transgenderism. Like, even though a lot of people still hate on it nowadays, there's like, it's not even a thing at all. But this main character is a man. There is a queer romance in it with a trans woman. So that's really special and really sweet, and Andrew Joseph White does a really authentic and incredible job depicting this experience of this man who is just trying to be who he is. How do I explain this plot? Okay, so this plot is so intricate and so like lush and full that I'm honestly gonna have a hard time keeping it short, but I'm gonna do my best. I'm so passionate about specifically this book, Spirit Bears Its Teeth. But it's about this world where people with purple eyes can see through the veil and communicate with the dead and ghosts. Men who have purple eyes are part of the society and are allowed to use their powers. Women who have purple eyes are not allowed to use their powers because they believe women are not strong enough to, and women who do become crazy, or so they say. This man, the main character, who is perceived by society as a woman still, dresses up as a man who he knows and goes to the like indoctrinating meeting, whatever, with this purple-eyed society, and tries to get through to as a man, even though all the people know him as a woman. And he gets caught and sent to an asylum for young adolescents with purple eyes, for girls, to be reformed. Once there, he discovers this pretty gruesome undertone of the society. Of course, it already is pretty bad with all that like really strict discrimination between men and women, but there's a lot more to the tale, especially about that specific facility. And also the main character, as I said, is autistic and really is so passionate about surgery. And his older brother is in school to be a surgeon. Women aren't allowed to be surgeons at this time, so the main character is not able to study with his older brother, but his older brother teaches him some stuff about surgery. And while there, ends up being a serious asset when some things go down in the asylum for girls with purple eyes to prevent them from going crazy. They're like, they're still young, let's save them. And that's it. That's all I'm gonna say. It's like, it's kind of mystery. It's very horror, very body horror. Ooh, it's something. Gore doesn't usually bother me nearly as much as like Paranormal Activity, but this will get ya. So, trans representation, queer relationship representation in this one. Spirit bears its teeth. The next in the fantasy section, the next LGBTQIA+ book recommendation is going to be Six of Crows, the Six of Crows duology by Leigh Bardugo. There is a gay man romance. It's definitely slow burn. It's definitely not the main plot. So don't expect this to be like a gay book, but there is a gay romance in it between two men. And it's pretty cute. It's kind of giving like, this is my first time doing this innocence, like really sweet. It's really sweet. I'm sure you know what Six of Crows is about. If you don't, it takes place in the Grishaverse where there is such thing as small magic, or small science, where people have powers essentially, even though they decline its label of being magic. And there's all these wars and all these fighting over borders, and there's a big rip in the middle of the continent. It's like impossible to pass through because there's monsters in it, blah, blah, blah. There's a big heist in the story to capture a person who invented a medicine or a pill that makes your power so strong. And there's a heist. This guy from the gutter of the city enlists his buddies to go capture that guy who invented that pill. And that's kind of all I'm going to say on that. It's so much more complicated than that. There's the Shadow and Bone series, there's the King of Scars series, there's so much stuff in the Grishaverse, but there is a gay romance in this one. The next one on this list is Dowry of Blood by S.T. Gibson. I'm not gonna lie, I didn't love this one when I read it, but I feel like I'm still gonna recommend it because it's definitely good if you go in with the right understanding of what you're about to read. This is queer in that there's a polyamorous relationship between two men and two women all together, and smaller relationships within that polyamorous relationship between the women and between the men, and then obviously all together. This is a retelling of Dracula from the perspective of his first wife, of how all of the wives go against Dracula and hate him because he's a bully and an abuser. It's not really about that. That's just like the framework around the story. It's honestly for vibes. Like if you want to read about the beauty of Vienna in 1420, like I would read this book. If you want to read about how this beautiful woman is described from head to toe in her garb and her curled hair and her luscious lashes and all that nonsense, I would read this book. It's vibes. The way it's advertised and the framework makes it sound like it's like this delicious, rich, historical horror, romance, gothic, but it's not. It's not. Which is why I struggled with it, because I went in with that expectation, but it's not that, unfortunately. But if you like vibes, and if you like Dracula retellings, I recommend this one, and there's polyamory in it. So there you go. Okay, I believe this is the last in the fantasy, sneak peek, in the fantasy section, and that is Once and Future Witches by Alex Harrow. This is the only Alex Harrow book I like, Alex E. Harrow book that I like. I did not like The Thousand Doors of January, or whatever it's called, at all. But this book is really, really good. The romance in it is gay women. It's a lesbian relationship. And it's essentially this story about these three sisters, again, in like Regency era or something, Renaissance, I don't know. Something like that. It's not really clear. There are three different perspectives. And one of them is like young and rambunctious. One of them is pregnant and just trying to get by, like, you know, work it out. And the oldest is like the smart girl who is very active in society and like trying to make change and stuff. It's so beautiful the way it interprets like the library, Alexander's library of Alexander, whatever is in this. There's a lot of magic and witchcraft in it. There's lots of talks of tarot. There's the maiden mother crone. There's a lot of really good stuff in this. And The lesbian relationship is between the smart oldest sister and another person. No spoilers. But it's just really good. It's really long. You definitely have to stick with it. But I loved this book. I was so surprised by it because everybody rants and raves about this author's other book, Thousand Drawers of January, and I hated that book. But this book is something else. Something else. Once and Future Witches. On to science fiction. I think I only have 3 books in this section. First one is going to be Song for the Wild Built by Becky Chambers. This is a future world where the main character is once again non-binary. It just happens to be so. Like, it's told from third person, and the pronouns used to talk about the main character is they, them. And there is one point where some people ask each other like their pronouns when they first meet, as though it's normal, but there are also men and women who go by she, her, and he, him. It's kind of like whatever. It kind of has nothing to do with the plot. The main character just happens to be, what I'm going to assume and project as non-binary from like the perspective of this planet, right? This is a different world. But this is a super short story. I just read it like this past week. And it's about this world where people are monks. They follow like under disciplines of different gods. And this monk wants to be under the god of tea and gets like this little trailer thing and goes from town to town with tea. And even though they travel everywhere, they're still really dissatisfied with their life. So they decide to go into the wilderness where they find robots. Thousands of years ago, robots were created, became sentient, and they were like, we actually reject society and we want to go live in the wilderness and be closer to like nature and animals. And humans were like, okay, work. And they came up with this treaty to let that happen and for humans to no longer use like robotics or AI or anything like that. Nothing that could potentially be sentient. And this monk while in the woods meets a robot. And robots and humans haven't talked in many a time. So it's really interesting. And its main character is non-binary. So there you go. The next in the sci-fi section, I talk about this book like every video. I don't know how. Why does it come up so much? I couldn't tell you. Left Hand of Darkness by Ursula K. Le Guin. It's hard to categorize it as LGBTQIA+. It covers topics of gender really interestingly, so I included it in this list. So it's future where there are many different planets and they have like interplanet treaties and trade and whatnot. And somebody from Earth goes to a planet where gender does not exist, genitalia does not exist. And these people have been very uninterested in connecting with the other planets because they're like really grossed out by people who have genitalia and who have gender. And other people from other planets struggle to communicate with them because this genderless planet doesn't have like gender hierarchy. It doesn't structure its socioeconomics around gender. Domesticity, it looks very different. Romance looks very different. And they struggle to relate to each other from the genderless perspective and the heavily gendered perspective. So this person from Earth goes to this genderless planet and tries to like make it work, tries to find relations, and ends up stuck like in a blizzard or something with one of the genderless people, and learns a lot about what it's like to not be a man or a woman and to not be hypersexual. So I could sit here and make arguments for like gender fluid, non-binary, demisexual, asexual people. Like I could definitely make arguments for all those, but I think the beautiful thing about this book specifically is because it's so impossible to label, it makes you think so much about how gender and sexuality impacts our day-to-day lives on this planet, because that planet just doesn't. It just never existed, and so it never had any sort of impact, and they didn't structure any framework around it. So it's really interesting, and I wanted to include it on this list because it does talk about gender and sex. However, I'm just going to call it like a queer book, but I can't call it like a book with non-binary representation. You know what I'm saying? So really interesting stuff. Left Hand of Darkness. Last book in the sci-fi section, Iron Widow by Jay Zhao. How do I describe this book? It's a little bit fantasy too. But I feel like it's more sci-fi. This has polyamory and a gay relationship between men in it. That is the queer representation up in there. And God, again, how do I explain this book? It's like ancient China, but also dystopia. And also there's aliens. And also people can like have this power to like connect with their, it's almost like spirit animal, but it's like a giant machine, and they fight each other in their giant machines that they connect to. The main character is like the super rageful woman, and she's also disabled because she like prescribed to that ancient Chinese tradition of like binding her feet to the point of not being able to walk. So she can't walk, but she can become a giant mechanical thing. Did I do a good job? I don't know, I'm sorry. But polyamory between two men and a woman, and the two men also have this cute little relationship on the side. So there's your representation. Read the book. Okay, nonfiction. 3 more books to go, y'all. I'm doing okay. I'm doing good on time. So the first book is Word Slut by Amanda Montell. This is technically a feminist book, but there is a section that talks about queer topics. This is a nonfiction book about linguistics and looking at it from a feminist perspective, and how the patriarchy has controlled and manipulated language to enable itself, and how language can be used as a tool for feminism to create gender equality. And Amanda Montell includes a chapter about gay talk, like flamboyant voicing, and it's a really interesting section, and I feel like it deserves to be on that list because of the deep dive into how critical we can be when men speak femininely, and how oftentimes we assign that to gay men specifically. And it's just really interesting. She also talks about like black scent and cultural language inflections and usage and stuff. It's just really interesting. So I wanted to include it on this list. The next book on this list is Elliot Page's memoir, Page Boy. Obviously, Elliot Page was assigned female at birth and was a lesbian, and now is a man. Look how beautiful he is. So fabu. The man he always wanted to be. And this is just like a memoir of his life as an actor. It's mostly kind of about being an actor. There's not a ton about him as a queer person, but I still think it deserves to be on this list because he's trans and was a lesbian too. So there's a lot of really interesting stuff to look into there. Just kind of like all over the place, non-chronological, talking about his experience as a child actor, as a young actor, creepy directors, and then his gratefulness of being accepted by his family and stuff when he came out as trans. So, Page Boy. I forgot a book. No! Oh my gosh, I forgot a book from the sci-fi section. Hell Followed With Us by Andrew Joseph White's other book. Oh no, this was supposed to be in the sci-fi section. Sorry, I think I had 16 books to talk about today. Of course, I lost track of one. Hell Followed With Us. I'm going to talk about it really quick. Again, trans representation. This book actually, I would say, has like literally every representation like you can imagine in it, because it's dystopian about this evangelical cult that has invented a virus that killed many people, and they were like, this is the next, what do they call it? Thing where God kills people that aren't believers. What is that called? Whatever. You know what I'm talking about. And this person who was in the cult leaves because he's trans, assigned female at birth is a man, and wants to leave because he's not allowed to be trans, and because they're kind of abusing him really badly and using the virus to like try to control him, whatever. And he goes, I thought this was such a brilliant way to be really diverse with your characters without it just being like, oh, and also, by the way, literally everything under the alphabet soup umbrella exists in this world, you know what I'm saying, in this one place. The probability of that is not super high, but it is if an LGBTQIA plus youth facility becomes stomping grounds for a resistance group of the evangelical cult. It's just like all these people who were kids when the plague started, they're all queer, and they just didn't leave because they had nowhere else to go. So of course there's going to be a ton of queer people there, and this trans person goes there and meets all these queer people. Let me see if I can remember. There's people who use non-she, he, they pronouns, like the xi, xer stuff. There's a gay man, there's a lesbian couple, there's a non-binary person, there's a gender fluid person, I think, too, that goes back and forth between man and woman, pronouns, and also autism representation. I believe that the love interest, there's a gay romance also in it. The love interest is autistic, if I remember correctly. So tons of representation there. And again, Andrew Joseph White style, body horror galore, gory as heck. Like, it's a lot. It's a dystopian, true to dystopian. It has an unhappy ending, but tons, like literally the most queer representation I think I've ever read in a book, in a way that wasn't like, oh, and by the way, this random public high school happened to have like literally every flavor of queer magically, because then it's kind of like, that's great, thank you for trying, but how realistic is that? You know what I'm saying? But this, literally to have it be a facility where people who are queer that were kicked out of their homes or just seeking a community escaped to, of course you're going to have a lot of different flavors of people. I thought it was so well done. Last book, I'm sweating. It's hot and I'm sweating. Women Don't Owe You Pretty by Florence Given. Much like Word Slut, this is a book about feminism, but it does have a couple sections on being queer. Florence Given is a bisexual woman, so she talks about that in this book. It's kind of just like your basics about feminism. I didn't learn anything super new in this book, but I did get a lot of what I did already know affirmed, which always feels good. And there's like beautiful graphics. Let me see. Oh, slay. Oh, slay. Maybe I'm too much. Maybe my abundance just reminds you that you're lacking. Oh, slay. So I wanted to throw this on here. It's got some LGBTQIA topics in it, so I wanted to include it. Even though it's predominantly a feminist book, feminists are hopefully intersectional and also like to cover queer grounds as well. So Women Don't Owe You Pretty by Florence Given. Oh my god, y'all, we did it. I'm like literally sweating so much. Thank you so much for watching. I know I talked really fast and I went through books really fast, but I just wanted to give like an ultimate list of all of the queer books that I could think of that I've read in the past few years to recommend to you for Pride Month. I hope you enjoyed. Feel free to like, comment, subscribe, do whatever you want to do. I'm not your mother, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.